The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings and thank you for joining us for this webinar titled Energy Reporting in 2020, Getting Your Vision Checked. I love the clever play on words there, but you know, it really is a worthy notion as we start this new decade and people begin to get initiatives for the year underway to check on the vision of your company's energy reporting and what it's providing you. So let's start by doing a couple of quick introductions. My name is Tim Porter and I help manage strategic accounts here at EnergyWatch. I've been with the company for nearly 7 years, helping companies leverage our utility data aggregation solution for a variety of use cases, including energy management and sustainability reporting in particular. And I'm joined by my friend Andy Anderson, Managing Director of EnergyWatch, a longtime EnergyWatch partner. Andy, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself?
Great. Thanks, Tim. Thanks again for having me on the webinar. Again, Andy Anderson, Managing Director and Partner over at EnergyWatch. We're headquartered up here in New York City. Been around for about 20 years, working with EnergyWatch for about 7 years, and essentially work with real estate portfolios across the globe, heavy concentration in the U.S., obviously, and work with them on reducing energy consumption, reducing emissions, reducing costs, et cetera.
Great. Thank you for that, Andy. And I really do appreciate you joining me here today as a serious subject matter expert. So as we get started taking a look at this topic of getting clear vision in 2020 on all things energy management, I figured we could start with the description of what we're going to call reporting 1.0. You know, when it comes to energy management, it is generally a crawl, walk, run type of thing for most companies. And this is a prudent approach, especially as companies are first dabbling with the notion of managing their energy and with reporting performance and results to their various constituents. And often the crawl or even the early walk stage looks something like this. They look at things like total energy consumption, total spend on energy, and maybe begin gathering enough data to report on the performance of various energy projects that they undertake. And these efforts often begin kind of piggybacking on some existing infrastructure and some existing data that's already available, often from their AP department. So AP has to get the bills paid and they have to do budgets on what monthly spend is expected, so that they do have access to some of these reasonably high level but still useful sets of data. And especially as a energy management or sustainability team is just beginning to get funding and to take an established role in the organization, this piggybacking foothold on some existing infrastructure can really be a fortunate one, getting them a good start on having some insight and some vision into their company's energy usage and spend, and establish that, you know, they can have a real tangible value to the organization. But, you know, once you've already begun to crawl and maybe begun to walk down this energy management path, you start hitting a ceiling in what insights you're able to gain and consequently what initiatives you're able to undertake. So to begin to actually run in this energy management analogy that we're talking about here, to get to what we're going to call reporting 2.0, you really need a greater level of detail. Andy, can you maybe elaborate on what we mean by reporting 2.0 and the type of data that requires?
Yeah, absolutely. So even looking at the prior slide, you know, looking at total consumption, total spend, really 20 years ago when we started doing this, that was the data that was available. It was, you know, basically impractical, impossible to get granular line item information. But there's a ton of really rich, valuable data that exists already in the bills that people have for their locations. So, you know, the whole crawl, walk, run model, you don't need to kind of jump right into equipment level metering, you know, real-time pulse output at 5-second intervals, you know, automated fault detection diagnostic stuff, which is all great, but you should build this foundation and unlock the value that you have within the actual invoice data on electric, gas, steam, water, sewer, whatever it might be. So looking at reporting 2.0, like the granular consumption, the granular spend in terms of, you know, is this a demand-related charge, a usage-related charge? Is it, you know, a late fee, a deposit, something that's non-recurring? You know, looking at the performance in terms of not just an average, you know, simple payback, but looking at real measurement and verification using IPMVP and ASHRAE Guideline 14 outputs, taking that data for identifying opportunities as it relates to peak load management, so on and so forth. Kind of the theme here is there's a lot of kind of foundational data that drives a lot of use cases, and really everybody should be reading off the same script of music, or the same sheet of music, so to speak. And reporting 1.0 is very much about, I have a very specific problem to solve. I need to pay my bills, or I need to operate my building, or I need to report to Energy Star or whatever other sustainability schema out there. Reporting 2.0 is, let's get everybody on the same page, use the same set of data. There's subsets of that data that's really applicable for different personas and functional roles, but get it all in one place and not have to have 5, 6 different siloed kind of companies that are not speaking to each other. Put it in one place, unlock the value of that invoice data, and complement it with the other stuff. So again, that walk, crawl, run model, complement it with weather data, with the tariff information, with the supply market information, with actual customer level KPIs in terms of occupancy, widget production, customers served, patients treated, et cetera, et cetera.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks, Andy. So it's really obvious to me when you've got folks like yourself that really understand the nuances of energy management and the types of insights that you could try to look for if you only had the right information, that a deeper data set really would allow you to see much more clearly and to consequently do a lot more things. But being in the energy data business like we are here at UrgentNet, I also sympathize with companies as they start to try to get to those bits of information. You described it's a set of data that does exist, but just typically in places that are challenging to get. The 1.0 type data that we talked about can come from a variety of sources. Initially, these sources could include, as we mentioned, an AP department, and often they're using a bill pay provider who does a great job paying the bills on time, but maybe not as much detail that you might need to do some of the more advanced reporting that you'd look for. Or maybe the data initially is coming from the utilities directly themselves via EDI feeds, or even through manual data entry efforts. But these data sets are really limited, aren't they, Andy, in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of manual entry, obviously, it's pretty infeasible to get to the line item information. If we're talking about one site with maybe 3 utilities, then yeah, sure, you can do that. But if you're talking about multi-site across lots of different jurisdictions, perhaps domestic and international, different commodities, different kind of regulatory regimes, it gets to be a little bit impractical and impossible to kind of do manually. But there's a place for that, obviously, because not every site's digitized. There's water companies that we both work with that city of Oshkosh in the middle of nowhere, to postcard kind of handwritten. You can't really get that digitized the same way you can with Duke or Georgia Power or Con Edison or whoever it might be. But again, kind of working with that source of the information, using what you have and complementing where necessary. It's not entirely like a rip and replace kind of model that we're looking at.
Right. So it really does kind of start at the source. And it would require, really, to solve this problem, you need to have sort of a new approach to get to the data that you're looking for. The first step that you might take to try to use this new model would be to reach out to your existing systems, maybe, and see what you can do to enrich your data. And if that potentially, if your energy management platform lacks that capability, you could explore building your own data plan if you have the resources to do that. UrgentNet, I know, works with many energy managers to get granular data and integrate it into the system that they're using, or stack that as an additive solution, something additive to their already well-functioning bill pay system. And if your energy management platform is still unable to work with this advanced data set, help you gather it or make use of it if you're able to gather it, you may have to look into getting a new energy management platform that really has granular data built in and gives you more detailed reports and greater savings opportunities because of that. So, Andy, what insight can you give us on this sort of this different new prescribed approach?
Yeah, so I mean, you can obviously start with getting the data yourself, and whether that's again manual EDI, the bill pay company working with EnergyNet, whatever the data source is. The trick is kind of refining that information to meet your goals, right? If you're looking at just pure 1.0 kind of reporting and all the stuff that we're talking about doesn't really, factor in, maybe not yet. Then it's not as important to have all that granular information. However, if you are looking to expand, keep up with competitors, maybe be more progressive in the industry, whatever it might be, then getting that granular information is the first step, and you can either get it yourself, you can ask whoever you're working with currently to kind of amend how they're doing things to provide this information, or as I mentioned before, it's really doesn't have to be rip and replace because we know that's painful. Complementing what you're doing currently. If you have a platform in place that exists to pay the bills, for example, and the accounting department's happy, then don't change it. It's possible and economically it makes sense in a lot of cases to complement what you're already doing with other systems and other sources of data. Maybe again, that's kind of on its own to pay the bills, and then sustainability, engineering, asset management, operations, property management, facility management, whatever it might be, is using this other kind of source of data. They should obviously match up. But having that information where you have that kind of granular data, the more granular it gets, the harder it is to work with, which is kind of probably part of the problem that we've seen in the market. And I think you can also speak to that as well, Tim. So the whole build versus buy kind of conundrum that a lot of companies have on not just energy, but lots of things that they're doing. I don't know if you can speak yourself to kind of some of what you've seen in the market from companies trying to work directly with your data and accomplish these things, and maybe not having the most success.
Yeah, we certainly can, Andy. We worked long enough together that we've had plenty of shared experiences here. But we pride ourselves on having a really solid, very detailed data set. That was what we set out to do from the very beginning of EnergyNet's starting, and we are confident that the data we're providing is a high quality data set that really does capture every bit of detail that you might want to see from the different utility invoices that we're gathering the data from. But that is a data source in and of itself, and that's it, right? And if there were such a thing as a perfectly defined data set from all of the different utility providers that everybody agreed to how things should be represented, then this would be a lot less difficult problem. But I think the thing you're speaking about specifically is if you're working with lots of different geographies, lots of different utility providers, lots of very detailed, complex tariff structures and demand models, those could look very, very different from one provider to the other. And it's really only with insight and experience of really understanding what the data is saying that you're able to make really good conclusions from it and do effective comparisons of maybe a building in Texas to a building in California, because the same type of data that Con Ed is trying to tell you or that PECO is trying to tell you might be very different from how it is that Southern Cal Edison says it. So there isn't really necessarily a common format of the data that as it comes out are represented on the bills. And it takes our data feed to help glean that data and give it back to you in a nice, concise, consistent manner, but then really takes insight and experience from folks like EnergyWatch that can help you make sure that you're looking at what it was that the utility was trying to tell you about the building and its consumption. So
yeah, and there's I'll add to that. There's quite a lot of different kind of audits that go into it that we'll talk about kind of later in the webinar, but I'm pretty sure you guys over 8,000 utilities or so that you kind of plug and play and acquire data for. While we don't have import rules and ingestion processes for like every single one of them, we have a good majority, and that's been sort of crafted and refined over the past 7 years, right? So we've put the kind of analogy to you and also to clients that the data from EnergyNet is as good as we can get it from anywhere. It still needs to be refined on top of it because there are specific rules to how do you map this information, not double counting certain charges or certain line items of usage or demand or reactive power, whatever it might be. So all of that kind of institutional refinement, it's that kind of oil refining analogy that we've looked at, where crude oil can't just be put into a car and the car won't run. It has to be refined into gasoline or something more powerful, and that's kind of the layer that we're working with here. And if you want to work with the data yourself, you then have to create that layer. You can't just plug it into the system untouched.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it does take real experience, not just in the industry, but also in our data model and the like, to help really get the biggest value from it, for sure, and really leverage the fact that once you've got that insight, you can use this system in total to just always have that insight as soon as it's available, month to month from the utility providers, and it's all kind of a hands-free system. So it's very, very important to have a good complementing integration with the data set. So Andy, I appreciate you giving us that insight. I think that you brought a couple of examples here of what this sort of 2020 Vision 2.0 kind of reporting capability would look like. Could you share and maybe explain a couple of these examples that you brought here today?
Yeah, so I'll kind of talk through the next few slides in terms of how we take your data and process it. We keep preaching this granular line item information in terms of the costs and the usages and demands. This is just a kind of quick snapshot with demo data from, I think this is Pepco, smaller account, as you can see, but we're not just looking at total kilowatt hours and total kW. We have the breakout here as it's provided by Pepco, intermediate, off-peak, on-peak, kWh, kW. We can't scroll it's not a live screen here, but it's all the line item charges broken out by, these are usage charges, these are demand charges, these are miscellaneous fees, which would be late fees, credits, deposits, etc. These are flat customer charges. This is taxes. These are regulatory charges. We do the same thing on the supply side. So this is only showing the T&D portion here. And then we use that information, all that line item data, to drive different kind of reporting use cases, right? So on the next slide, an example is looking at like a bill component report, we call it. So part of that refinement layer is obviously being able to capture all that line item data, but dynamically mapping all that line item information into those buckets that I talked about: use, demand on the supply side, the energy fixed versus variable, the regulatory pass-through charges, capacity, transmission, so on. What kind of report like this accomplishes, and there's 3 sections here, and it's a little bit of a eye chart, so you can't really see the numbers, but first side shows, or the top part of the chart is showing the different component buckets and the dollars. The middle is showing the component buckets and their unit rates. So, cost per kW on the demand stuff, cost per kWh on the kilowatt hour related usage stuff. And then the third kind of row there is looking at percentage allocation. And why this stuff is important is when you're kind of analyzing your portfolio and you're looking at what priorities or what you should be prioritizing, understanding from a territorial kind of standpoint where your facilities are located, how much of my cost is being driven by kW demand on an annual basis, on a monthly basis, how much is driven by kWh. So understanding that it's a lot easier to address 2 15-minute consecutive intervals for monthly demand, probably even easier to address, 1 CP, 5 CP, 4 CP, coincident peak stuff in the different ISOs for the supply side, because depending on the territory, depending on what your actual cap tag or PLC tag is, could be driving, up to 40-ish% of your annual supply cost, and that being roughly 15 to 30% of your total annual cost, depending on the territory as well. So without that line of information, you can't really derive what's driving what and where you should be focusing. So it's not going to tell you what to do, but it's going to point you in the right direction. And then once it does point you in the right direction and you do some sort of energy efficiency project, some sort of capital improvement, or just a kind of generic operational strategy from like an energy conservation standpoint, what I'll show on the next slide is using that data where you're prioritizing kind of what you should be looking at, and then actually implementing, deploying some capital from this is a sample kind of HVAC damper replacement up here in New York, and quantifying over time what the actual savings or the avoided cost, avoided consumption is. And this is all done using the line item information. We couple it with the interval data and the real-time meter information if it's available as well. and then models out, projects forward, all IP MVP option B and C, ASHRAE guideline 14 statistical outputs here in terms of kind of assessing the model precision and validity, but more importantly, using that line item data to show the avoided cost and the savings on a marginal basis. So not looking at average unit costs, not amortizing flat customer charges, full taxes, late fees, deposits, credits, all that stuff that shouldn't be in there and either counting towards or against your progress. And clients are using this to say, like, hey, you gave me $300,000. I'm returning the savings I was expected. Give me more money for more buildings, more projects, so on.
Great examples, Andy. Thank you for that, especially that level of detail and insight. I know it's going to resonate with a lot of the energy management folks out there. So thanks for sharing those. Now, can you relate some real world results and savings that you and some of your customers have seen from employing this type of capability, this lower level, higher visibility type of solution?
Yeah, absolutely. So I look at it kind of along the spectrum of administrative value to strategic value, right? So administrative value being more on the utility bill management, get the information in, audit the data. So having that line item granular information enables different kinds of audits. It's not just, total use, total cost, daily use, daily cost kind of stuff. But an example, pretty recently, top one here, incorrect pass-through regulatory charges from ESCOs. So we had a regional supplier here that was billing like new RPS and clean energy standard charges at the incorrect rate, and very easy to see that when we're looking at what it should be versus what the line items actually are. And that was 150,000 plus overbilling that was able to be recovered for a couple of clients. And then even more recently, incorrect application of taxes. So being able to do that line item mapping that says, okay, these are tax charges, being able to derive what those tax rates are. In this case, it was even simpler. The facility should have never been taxed at all. So seeing that there were tax charges, something that they weren't, the old, if you don't measure it, can't manage it. They weren't looking at this kind of detail. They were looking at just total costs on an Excel spreadsheet. So they didn't have a breakout of taxes. Once we start getting that line in details and we're like, here's the breakdown of all the charges. And they're like, wait a minute, we shouldn't be charged taxes. They're able to get an $80,000 refund from the state for kind of incorrectly taxing them. And then even more kind of we span the spectrum in terms of a few $100s, $3,000. One that was a $3 million refund in terms of being able to find through benchmarking against different similar properties, basically a load factor that was impossible for this kind of facility, and being able to go back to the utility on a more managed service standpoint in terms of conflict resolution and say, what's going on here. And it was a pretty quick refund because essentially they just transposed the meter constants. So instead of billing at 12 times, they're billing at 21 times. Not the exact numbers, but that's kind of the factors here. So pretty big span of administrative kind of values from an auditing standpoint.
That's some pretty big dollar oops in some of those instances. So no, this is great to see the rubber kind of hitting the road here with this type of visibility that we're talking about. So I think you've got one more maybe that is a good one with some visuals here. What are we looking at on this slide?
Yeah, so I mentioned kind of the value is like a range from administrative to strategic. This is being more on the strategic standpoint in terms of client was able to take the data, benchmark their portfolio, see kind of the actual rates that they were paying on a demand basis. They made an adjustment here to switch from steam-driven air conditioning to electric-driven high-efficiency chillers. It was $285,000 savings annually. Client, obviously with very little, no capital costs. There's obviously people cost to it in terms of operating. But the net savings here, clearly you're going to increase your electric side. So we're measuring and verifying that. You're going to decrease the steam side in this case. And the net savings being $285,000. Client was able to use this kind of third party, verify it, put it into their annual sustainability report, something that gets published to the market, publicly traded company. So kind of very useful to have a system that is abiding by IPMVP and ASHRAE guideline 14 and all that kind of stuff, and really stands up to the sometimes interrogations from, if you might be an institutional investor giving you the money, it might be a JV partner, might just be your own CFO, being able to say, no, like here's how it was done, here's what we followed, here are the results, and by the way, give me more money for the next project.
Yeah, this does start to be sort of a self-funding type of effort, doesn't it? After a while, if you can start showing these results and having something that really makes your team look like they know what they're talking about, and have
Sure.
a platform for seeing what impact you've got with different things that you try, you're probably going to be allowed to try a whole lot more things than if you didn't have this type of system in place. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I think we've got 4 or 5 minutes left here before we hit the half hour, and there are a couple of questions that have come in. So let me just read these off here, Andy, and I'll this first one here says, does the platform capture and store the original bill? And I can maybe start from the source there, and then you can elaborate a little bit from your perspective, from the platform's perspective. But we definitely do deliver the bill, the original bill, as a piece of the data that we're sending in the UrgentNet data feed. In fact, there's probably not a more important piece of data for us because that is the source. So we actually use that bill and its structured PDF format to pull the data off of it so that it helps us be very, very accurate, because we're looking effectively at a data file that happens to be formatted to be printed, but it's a data file. So we send that data source, which is the image and the actual bill, along with the data feed. So we do capture it for sure. And I'm pretty sure that's something that you make available through your platform, correct, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually, I think I'm sharing my screen now.
Oh, there we go. Let's go live.
Clarify that. Yeah. So, yeah, good question. Clearly, very important to have all the line item information, but accountants and accounts payable and auditors want to see the actual invoice images. So, this is the platform. This is live. You can see here kind of the procurement view with all the different supply components here, looking over month to month and past 12 versus prior 12, breaking out energy, non-energy, et cetera. But to answer the question, if I kind of navigate into the hierarchy here for the portfolio and look at a specific utility account and load this up, and kind of you'll see the analytics tab where it shows the breakdown of the supply and delivery costs and the ICAP tags and all these trends over time. But the actual invoice images do live in the system. We show that kind of what I all consider the lowest common denominator, reporting 1.0 kind of information, total consumption, supply delivery cost. But looking at the actual details in the sense of, okay, you can go to the line items, which we saw in the deck, but looking at the actual invoice images, whether it's dual billing, the T&D versus the ESCO, consolidated billing, again, consolidated on the ESCO side or consolidated on, through POR from the actual local distribution company. But yeah, the images are here. These are clearly samples. But we have those images, we have the line items, it's all stored in the same place. You can download this information one by one, which is, if you need something very quickly, pretty easy. Or through the reporting section, you can do a batch invoice download and say, I need all my electric invoices for calendar 2019 for the New York region, and it'll zip it up and email you the actual zip file kind of organized in that folder structure.
Okay, great. That's awesome. That's actually great to see it kind of live in action. We've got a couple of more questions here, but I think we might be running out of time for getting them answered. Maybe really quickly, we've got, about a minute left. This second question says, you're gathering all of this data, but how do we know that it's accurate? And it's a great question. Data quality is a really important piece. I know from the data acquisition perspective, that's a big, big thing for us. And so we've got, in addition to all the software technology that is gathering the data, we have hundreds of audits that we perform on the data to make sure that we are actually capturing what is represented on the bill. So we can speak to the quality of the data coming from us, matching what is on the invoice. So that's a very important step, but I think there's also the step further, right, Andy, that's only making sure that what's on the bill is correct, not whether the bill itself is correct.
Yeah, absolutely. So making sure the data that you're gathering is being presented to us as is. It's all the real kind of information, and make sure it kind of passes all your own audits. And we have a separate set of audits that are ran for, statistical stuff in terms of unit costs and daily usage, daily costs, et cetera. You can actually, see it on this screen. You've got the different icons here in terms of this invoice failed some audits. This invoice failed audits, but was approved by somebody in your organization. We've got the one with the green check and green guy here that says this this invoice failed some audits, but was manually validated by our analysts. So a lot of different ways that we capture this information. The actual kind of audits, again, some sample stuff here, but showing which audits failed or passed on both the delivery and the supply side. Being able to set up alerts and reports that can be generated that say, here's your here's your failed audits over the past week, and with links to the actual images and right into the system to go in and approve them or review them.
Great. Okay, so I think we're right at the half hour here. I want to wrap up and say thank you, Andy, for taking the time to join us today and share your wealth of wisdom on this topic. Anybody that has follow-up questions, you see our emails here. Please feel free to contact Andy or myself. We'd be happy to follow up with more detail. And again, thank you everyone for joining our webinar today.